Imagine attending your father's funeral, mourning his death, burying his casket, and spending 15 years visiting his grave. Now imagine getting a phone call that turns your entire world upside down. A call telling you that the man you buried, the man you grieved for over a decade, is actually alive and has been living just a few hundred miles away. This isn't a resurrection story or a miracle. This is a true crime case that involves deception, identity theft, and a family torn apart by the cruelest lie imaginable. Welcome back to Crime Scout. True Stories. What I'm about to share with you is one of the most bizarre cases of faked death and stolen identity that law enforcement has ever encountered, and the truth behind it is darker than you might expect. Our story begins in March of 2003 in a small town in Pennsylvania. John Hartley, a 52-year-old construction worker and father of 3, had been struggling. His business was failing, he was drowning in debt, and his marriage of 25 years was falling apart. Friends and family noticed he seemed depressed, withdrawn, not himself. So when his pickup truck was found abandoned on a bridge known locally as a suicide spot, with his wallet and a note inside, everyone feared the worst. The note was brief, apologetic, expressing that he couldn't handle the pressure anymore and that his family would be better off without him. It was heartbreaking, but sadly not uncommon. The local police launched a standard search operation. They dragged the river below the bridge for 3 days, searched the surrounding woods, interviewed witnesses, and investigated his last known movements. Despite their efforts, no body was recovered. However, given the circumstances, the evidence, and the suicide note written in what appeared to be his handwriting, the case was eventually classified as a presumed suicide. After 6 months, with no signs of life and no activity on his bank accounts or credit cards, John Hartley was legally declared dead. His family was devastated. His wife, Patricia, struggled to hold things together for their 3 children, ages 14, 17, and 19 at the time. They held a funeral service with an empty casket because there was no body to bury. Friends, relatives, and members of their church community gathered to pay their respects. Patricia stood beside that casket, weeping for the man she'd spent half her life with. The kids said goodbye to their father. They buried that empty casket in the local cemetery and placed a headstone with his name, his dates of birth and death, and the inscription, "Beloved Father and Husband." Life moved on, as it always does even after tragedy. Patricia eventually worked through her grief. The life insurance payout, though modest, helped clear some of John's debts and allowed her to keep the house. The children grew up, went to college, started careers, got married. They visited their father's grave on his birthday and on the anniversary of his death. 15 years passed. 15 years of believing John Hartley was dead. Then, in 2018, everything changed. A routine traffic stop in North Carolina, over 400 miles from where John supposedly died, set off a chain of events that would unravel the entire story. A state trooper pulled over a driver for a broken taillight. The man behind the wheel handed over a driver's license identifying him as Robert Griffin, a 58-year-old resident of Asheville. But something seemed off to the trooper. The photo on the license didn't quite match the man in front of him. The date of birth made him 67, not 58 as the license claimed. When the trooper ran the license, it came back valid, but there were some irregularities in the records. The man was detained for further questioning, and that's when things started to unravel. Under pressure, he finally admitted that Robert Griffin wasn't his real name. The real Robert Griffin had died of a drug overdose in 2005, and this man had assumed his identity shortly after. The fingerprints were run through the national database, and the results were shocking. The man sitting in that police station was John Hartley, a man who had been legally dead for 15 years. The authorities immediately contacted the Pennsylvania Police Department that had handled his original disappearance. They, in turn, had the difficult task of contacting Patricia Hartley, now Patricia Goodwin, as she'd remarried 8 years earlier. You can imagine the phone call. the detective explaining that her first husband, the man whose funeral she'd attended, whose grave she'd visited, was actually alive and had just been arrested in North Carolina. Patricia initially thought it was a cruel prank or a case of mistaken identity. It took DNA confirmation to make it real. The question everyone wanted answered was simple. Why? Why would a man fake his own death and abandon his family? The investigation into John's life over those 15 years revealed a story of cowardice, selfishness, and cold calculation. According to his eventual confession, John had been planning his disappearance for nearly 6 months before that day in 2003. The debt he'd accumulated wasn't just business-related. He'd been gambling heavily, taking out loans from questionable sources, and was in deep with some dangerous people. He was facing threats and possibly worse. On top of that, he'd gotten involved with another woman, someone he'd met through work, and had fantasized about starting a new life. So John Hartley staged his suicide. He left his truck on that bridge, complete with the note, and simply walked away. A friend, someone he worked with who was never identified or charged, picked him up a mile down the road and drove him to another state. For the first few years, John drifted, working cash jobs under the table, staying in cheap motels and rooming houses. He deliberately avoided any situation that would require official identification. Then, in 2005, he met someone in a homeless shelter who taught him how the underground identity trade worked. That's when he learned about Robert Griffin. For a price, he obtained Griffin's birth certificate and social security number. Griffin had died with no close family, no one to notice his identity being used. With these documents, John applied for a driver's license, started building credit, and slowly created an entirely new legal existence. By 2008, he had a steady job as a warehouse supervisor, an apartment, even a girlfriend who knew him only as Robert Griffin. He became someone else entirely, and according to his later statements, he rarely thought about the family he'd left behind. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. Investigators discovered that John had occasionally checked in on his family over the years. Not in person, but through social media. He'd created fake profiles and would look at his children's pages, seeing their graduations, their weddings, their lives progressing without him. He saw his wife remarry. He saw his daughter have a baby, making him a grandfather he'd never be. And he did nothing. He let them continue believing he was dead. The legal consequences were complex. He was charged with identity theft for assuming Robert Griffin's identity, fraud for various documents he'd falsified, and insurance fraud, since his wife had received a life insurance payout based on his presumed death. However, faking your own death isn't technically illegal in most jurisdictions if you're not doing it to defraud someone. The insurance fraud charge was the most serious, carrying a potential sentence of 10 years. In 2019, John Hartley pleaded guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison with restitution ordered to the insurance company. But the real punishment wasn't legal. It was personal. His children wanted nothing to do with him. His oldest son released a statement saying that his father had died on that bridge in 2003, and the man in prison was a stranger. Patricia refused to even speak his name in interviews. The community that had mourned him felt betrayed and disgusted. The psychological damage he inflicted on his family by choosing to let them grieve, to let them suffer that loss for 15 years when he was alive and well, was something no prison sentence could address. The case raises profound questions about identity, responsibility, and the ripple effects of our choices. John Hartley wanted to escape his problems, so he committed the ultimate act of selfishness. He gave his family a lifetime of grief to purchase his own freedom from consequences. And in the end, he lost everything anyway. The new life he built was based on lies, and when it collapsed, he was left with nothing, not even the family he'd once had. This has been Crime Scout. True stories. Sometimes the dead don't stay buried, and sometimes that's not a blessing but a curse. If this case left you as stunned as it left me, Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true crime stories that prove reality is stranger than any fiction we could imagine. Write in one go. No headings, just case discussion with Hook. I'm using AI for voiceover. Please rewrite as human writing AI voce and make it professional and easy to understand. Moreover, use proper punctuations to make the real-like voice a man found alive 15 years after his funeral. My channel name is Crime Scout True Stories.